Welcome to this presentation of a paper Steve, Greg, and I just published in the Frontiers Open Access Journal System, a framework for exploring trust and distrust in natural resource management. We all have experiences with trust and distrust from our daily lives, but it's still a quite confusing concept, like a piece of soap in a bathtub. So how do we really get a handle on it? That's the question. We thought that our handle, the framework we present, should be founded in theory, but it should also mirror the experiences we had from practice. So this was our way of attempting to bridge between theory and practice. You have probably heard sentiments like this. I trust Chris, the local parks manager, but I don't trust the parks agency at all. So how can you trust an individual who represents an agency, even though you don't trust the agency? If you meet a new person, somebody unknown to you, and if there is something at stake, you will watch and scan for signs and be aware of what comes next. But over time, and as you start knowing this person, we can start to relax. But sometimes the initial alertness remain and stay with us over time. We will continue to watch, calculate, trying to predict. And in that way, we will spend a lot of energy trying to anticipate an unknowable future. As trust grows, we can let go the uncertainty and alertness. So this letting go is actually a luxury, as it allows us to stop thinking, and we don't have to scan or worry about possible betrayals or misuse of information. So the core of trust is this letting go. Trust allows us to relax, so we can actually focus on the problem we face instead of spending energy by scanning and worrying about the person we have in front of us. In that way, trust paves the way for collaboration and problem solving. Trust lubricates when we try to work together, but it's also the glue that holds a relationship together. And thus, trust is essential for working relationships, not least in natural resource management. Trust is dynamic as it develops over time. We often take it for granted. We just trust. But when we look into it, it is more nuanced. We find different types of trust, different reasons to trust, a whole range of possible targets of trust. And we also find some apparent contradictions. So it's not always straightforward. Of course, you can trust a person, but you can also trust a group of people, an organization, or for instance, a government agency, or even an airline. When you dig into the literature of trust, you will find the affective cognitive duality of trust described, which perceives trust as a mix of feeling and rational thinking. Out of this, two different types of trust has been identified, and the one is called calculus-based trust and the other identification-based trust. The calculus-based type of trust is really about rational thinking, predictability, reliability, and perhaps incentives in place. So in that sense, it's an evidence-based judgment of trust. So a contract or incentives will increase the level of trust. Or as an example, I trust the new team leader because her plans always stay on schedule. The other type of trust is identification-based trust, and that is much more about identity, shared values, or perhaps a common background. So you know that the other person will care for my values and my interests. So that's much more an emotional or moral, ethical-based basis for trust judgment. So shared values will increase trust. Or the example, I trust the new team leader because we graduated from the same university and we even share the same education. I'll now make a big transition to the issue of distrust. So if trust can be defined as confident positive expectations regarding another, distrust can be defined as confident negative expectations regarding another's conduct. So in that sense, trust and distrust are fundamentally different from each other, rather than just more or less of the same thing. So while both trust and distrust is a conclusion about the other, then trust implies a willingness to act, while distrust implies a need to protect oneself from the other. So again, distrust is not just the absence of trust. It's a completely different ballgame. So when distrust comes in, doubt grows into suspicion, and competition replaces collaboration. And issues like fear, suspicion, and the need to protect oneself from the other becomes part of the game. I have now thrown a lot of ideas on the table. So how can we organize those? So far, we have made three useful distinctions. First, between trust and distrust. Second, between trust in an individual and his/her organization. And third, between the two types of trust judgments. Those distinctions we have condensed into our framework in the form of this compact trust-distrust matrix. On the top, you'll find the distinction between calculus-based and identification-based trust. On the left side, you find the distinction between the microscale of the individual and the group and the macro scale of institutions, organizations at the societal level and the systems that are part of this. And in each cell of the matrix, we find the distinction between trust and distrust. At this point, it should be noted that it is possible to hold several trust judgments at the same time. So for instance, across scales, as we have seen with Chris representing the parks agency, it could also be between different types of trust. So maybe you trust your brother because he's your brother, but it turns out that he had let you down time after time. And on that basis and that experience, you actually don't trust him as much. Or it could be between different domains of the life. So for instance, you could trust a person to drive you safely home because he's a good driver, but not to babysit your children because it turns out that he beats his own children. So different aspects of life may come to different trust judgments. Such complex patterns of multiple trust judgments are captured in the matrix. So the example with your brother who has let you down can be illustrated like this. So you find at the micro scale some level of trust, identification-based trust, because he's your brother. On the other hand, you find some calculus-based distrust because he let you down on the micro scale. The example of Chris from the Parks Agency can be illustrated like this, with full-blown distrust at the macro scale in combination with quite a bit of trust at the micro scale. In the field, we often hear statements like this: environmentalist can't be trusted, but she has proven to be extremely reliable. So in this example, we find a lot of identification-based distrust at the macro scale, while at the same time we find calculus-based trust on the micro scale, because she has proven to be reliable. Of course, in this example, it might as well have been politicians or ranchers or government officials who were not easy to trust. Here we suggest that you take a break and pause the presentation, take a look at this version of the matrix and see if you can find a scenario that corresponds to this pair of trust judgments. Ding, take a break. Welcome back. This could be an example that corresponds to the matrix shown. Out of the matrix, we have inferred a set of propositions that reflect our research as well as our field experience. The first one is about trust building versus distrust reduction. Often in the field, we are asked to build trust. However, this is oftentimes a misplaced request because there is so much distrust around there that has to be addressed before we can work on trust building. So rather, it's going to be distrust reduction first, and then we can come back with some trust building. Another of our propositions is about how easy it is to revise existing trust judgments. And it turns out that it is very difficult and time-consuming to revise identification-based trust judgments that exist. This is because they are often founded in deeply held values and identity issues. However, it's not hopeless. It is possible to stimulate revision of identification-based trust judgments, but that would require a lot of work on shared values, shared history perhaps, and quite often people who fight about a landscape, they actually love and are attached to the very same landscape. So here there is a potential to find some common ground and some level of trust building based on that. There are a lot of other interesting questions that we could work on. So for instance, how do you increase your own trustworthiness? That could be either calculus-based trustworthiness, or it could be identification-based trustworthiness. And it would be quite different approaches in each case, what you would do in order to increase your overall trustworthiness. So this is worth to think about and to work on. The big question is, of course, how to address trust and distrust issues in process design. And here we believe you find a lot of inspiration in the paper, so perhaps take a look. So maybe you will find some inspiration in our paper, which you can download from Frontier's open access system, or you can turn up at our Q&A session on Wednesday the 22nd at 12 noon US CD time. So see you then.